All right, we are back. I am back. We kicked Tyler out. Season 4 podcast, Virtus Performance. We're back. We're back in the studio office. Season 4 is going to look a little different, but very similar. Not that Nick here is looking at me like he has any idea what we're talking about, but Season 4, I've come into a lot of spare time, so lucky you guys. You're going to hear a lot of my voice, which is probably not a good thing, but we'll get to that in a minute. We're going to go down a little bit more of a topical season where, one, we get to know our guests, but two, we're going to talk about a specific topic that our guests are involved with directly or have done previous experience with. So that's what Season 4 is going to look like. So lucky you guys. Send in your requests for topics, people, what you want to know about. It should be pretty interesting from now until March, April when we kick off Season 5. But without further ado, today's guest, Mr. Nick. Mr. Nick.
Mr. Nick. That's like introducing me like Dr. Nick the Simpsons.
Oh, you just said 22-year-olds are old, so this is where we're at.
Well, I'm getting to that point in my life, aren't I?
Yes, we have Nick from Mets Performance in Mentone?
Mulgrave.
I know it was an M.
It's an M.
Yeah, it's an M.
Yeah.
It was close enough.
Yeah.
Nick and I went to uni together through our undergrad, through sports science, and Nick kept in the sports science field where all the smart people stay. And I went to strength and conditioning where all the less smart people stay. So that's where we're at. Today, Nick, we're going to get to learn Nick again. You haven't been on this one. I've been on yours.
No.
Yeah, I went on yours. We're going to get to know Nick, but also we're going to talk about nutritional strategies for endurance performance and some other things around nutrition and sports performance, which will be pretty interesting. But without further ado, again, Nick, who are you?
Yeah, so, sports scientist. As you said, we studied together a long time ago now.
Studies are reach. You studied.
Well, we did one group assignment that I reckon you probably carried me through a bit, but that's all right. So, outside of that, working in endurance performance. So primarily I describe it as endurance and ultra endurance. A lot of our clientele are triathlon, cycling, running, but then the majority of that group again are 3-4 hour plus events. So we have a lot of Ironman, half Ironman, triathlon, ultra distance runners, which obviously it changes things completely compared to just the typical 5K parkrun on the weekend. It's like we're now dealing with these extensive events, and I mean, for the most part, the Ironman guys, they're out there for anywhere between realistically 8 hours, 12 hours, 10 hours, depending on how
I don't
good they
sleep
are.
that much.
Yeah, it becomes a really interesting sort of space. So obviously still do a lot of work with the shorter stuff. So we do get park runners or 10Kers, half marathon, the traditional sort of common endurance, but then we get the crazy people who come in and do the silly events.
Crazy is a good word. You gotta be a different character to get into one of those.
Yeah, or
let alone stay in it, actually.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing as well because of the length of the event, most of them are only racing once, maybe twice a year at that distance. So becomes very different to something like footy, basketball, where it's like, all right, we got something to look forward to every week. It's like we got 9 months before we can get out there and actually race or compete.
Yeah, and I think I see a lot of people that do ultra marathons or ultra endurance events and think not the training's easy, but it's similar to what they experience, and it's worlds different.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that you don't know until you know.
Yeah.
But also from the point of view of like, your long run isn't 10K anymore.
No.
Your long run becomes...
your 10K is just kind of another midweek run.
Yeah, which is crazy.
Yeah.
What made you, one, go down the endurance path with sports science, and two, what makes you stay?
Yeah, so I think from a couple of side of things, I mean, I've always been interested in the endurance sports. I raced triathlon coming through as a kid. It wasn't my chosen sport. Like I did footy and cricket, like most kids did. But then over summer, I'd go and race just short distance tries, and sort of I'd always been a swimmer as well. So like coming out of back end of a footy season, I'd been swimming all year. I was kind of like, the running component's easy, the swimming component's easy. May as well just jump on the bike a few times and see how we go. So I've always sort of been interested in that aspect. But then in terms of then working in it, like coming back to where we sort of split out of uni, it was like I went and interned in strength conditioning initially, and I worked out really, really quickly that being on a gym floor just wasn't for me.
Where'd you do that?
So I interned first at University of Michigan.
Yeah, we'll get into that. It's on my list.
End of my second year of undergrad, I went over the States, went there, and then Melbourne Vic Centre in the swimming.
That's
so
right, yeah.
It's now MSAC swimming, I think, because the club folded. But Yeah, like S&C, I still love it and I still enjoy it. I still have the process of going in and training in the gym, but the problem solving aspect of that and sort of the day to day of it probably just wasn't really sort of where I was interested in. I'm more interested in the testing side, the physiology side, and then ultimately from my own stuff now in terms of training, like largely a bit more conditioning sort of focused in the stuff I do. So that's where I sort of naturally fell a bit more into endurance. And then apart from anything, at the time, so Luke, who set up Mets, started everything up. Perfect timing when I was transitioning out of uni. It was a good opportunity to jump in. We have a testing lab, so we do a lot of VO2 max and all of that. So it was sort of this perfect opportunity to get in the field and start working rather than just volunteering and interning. And then obviously that then sort of snowballed into working in it pretty much full time for the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, who knows with COVID? I lost track of years. Did you play any team sports growing up as well, or was it just purely weekend endurance kind of stuff?
So the triathlon stuff was kind of just like an addition. So I grew up swimming. So I've been a swimmer since I was, I don't know, the toddler stuff where you jump in with your parents all the way through to, I swam regularly until I was about 18, 19. I had
nippers in my head, but that's life-saving.
That's life-saving. Yeah. I just swam like pool staff in a squad. Nothing ever really serious. It was only ever sort of like once a week. I got reasonably good, but it was more something that I just enjoyed the process of swimming and growing up swimming. I sort of wanted to continue. But then like I played footy through winter until I was 16, 17, and then cricket in the summer. Like they were the two major things that I wanted to do. And like a lot of kids, when you sort of like 5, 6 years of age, you're like, oh yeah, I'll play cricket for Australia one day, and then in the winter season I'll go and play footy in the AFL. It's like I worked out pretty quick that neither of those two were going to be something I was going to be ever good enough to reach that level at. So
did you want to, even though you might have known? Is that why you stayed in sport?
Yeah, that's definitely why I stayed in sport. That's probably actually where the umpiring side of things came into it, which I know we're kind of jumping over.
Nah, it doesn't matter.
There's a lot of things going on.
Podcasting, man. You do whatever you want.
but that's where I worked out. Like cricket was something I always enjoyed just from the social team aspect. But then footy, it just got to a point where I just became less and less interested in playing footy, even from a social side of things. We had quite a competitive group that I grew up playing footy with. And so it just got to that point where I just wasn't committed enough to want to keep playing into sort of senior footy, reserves footy. And it just didn't really interest me as much. But that's where I started umpiring like junior footy, a couple of years prior to finishing playing. Had a bit of potential there. Saw that was probably a more viable pathway for me to be an elite athlete, so to speak.
You're still an athlete, mate. You work harder than most people do.
Well, it's a type of thing. It's like I sort of somewhat look at it as my opportunity to sort of explore that passion I had of wanting to make it at the elite level from an athletic perspective myself. But then external to that, I mean, I've always just wanted to work in sport anyway. So I guess that's where the career from a sports science sense came from, was regardless of what I was doing myself, I'd be working in sport anyway. The umpiring stuff now is a bit of a selfish little elite athlete endeavour.
Nothing wrong with being selfish
for the time being anyway.
It's my pet hate around the world, selfishness, because at the end of the day, it's our lives. Let's just do what we want. And when we talk about like that selfish side of things, like we still want what we want. Like a lot of us, especially in a health and fitness, just being very niche here, but in a health and fitness world, like a lot of us exist to help people make less of the mistakes that we made to start with, but also it's filling the void that potentially we didn't get to where we wanted to, or anything like that. And if you still have the opportunity to go and strive for higher performing honours, then I mean, why not, right? I don't think it's selfish.
Yeah, it's one of those ones that, I mean, it's sort of it fills that gap. Like like I said, I knew pretty early that I wasn't going to play one of those sports at a pretty elite level. But it's still my opportunity to sort of stay involved in that space. And it's a good just outlet apart from anything. It's just like get out, train, keeps me on my toes in terms of trying to improve as well. Especially with I'm not training anywhere near the extent of some of my Ironman guys, but like at least it's one of those things I can fully appreciate. Then you get majority of the stuff that they're going through as well, rather than just sort of going, hey, here's a 30-hour training week, go and do it. It's like, well, I've got a reasonable understanding of what that's sort of like.
Yeah. Was triathlon something you wanted to dabble in as well, or not knowing that you felt that cricket and footy weren't a path that you were going to go down from an athletic point of view? Did triathlon fill that void as well, or
it's sort of an interesting one because once umpiring really started taking place, and I sort of really got involved in that, that sort of took up a bunch of my time, and that's actually probably the reason why I stopped racing tries as a kid. You just get into longer footy seasons as you get into senior footy, moving up into sort of state league footy for the last 6 or so years now. It's like your pre-seasons get longer, you just run out of time in the year to be able to do other stuff. But then, triathlon was something that, like, I want to continue to go and race, but it's something definitely now that I want to go and do it for the enjoyment aspect. Like, I want to get better at it, but it never really turned into, gee, I could race this as my sport. Yeah. I just never had I really enjoy it as a sport. And even like when I was younger, I used to race some of like the state squad kids when I was like 15. And I'd do pretty well and I'd like podium and things like that. But it never was, I'm just going to drop everything else and start racing triathlon because I got some potential. Whereas umpiring was definitely more that space of, I've got some potential here. I can actually go pretty far. And I sort of took to it a bit more with probably a bit different motivation for it. Yeah. So, but then, like, I guess from an interest perspective, probably that enjoyment of the sport enough has then kept me in it from a working sense. I really like breaking it down and analysing it as a sport, but racing it, I'm also just sort of genetically, I just know I'm not quite, I'd never be elite enough. I like going really, really fast over short distances.
You could still go out tomorrow and do one if you wanted to, but you know 100%. It's not going to be...
And I still want to go and race and do that, but I know it's not something that I've ever really had the motivation to strive to be elite at. I want to be good at it, but I guess, umpiring-wise is something that, for me, for whatever reason, and it's probably one of those ones I haven't really fully thought about the difference.
Well, no one's asked you.
But, well, yeah, true. But, umpiring-wise has always just been like, since I felt like I was good enough and I could see there was a bit of a pathway, I'm like, that's what I want to do. As long as I can and as far as I can get with it, that's what I want to do with it athletically.
When did you realise that was a possibility? Or how did you realise, I guess is probably a better option. I'm sure there's a lot of kids on the weekends that go boundary umpire for their $60 a game or something like that.
Well,
maybe. I don't know what the pay is anymore. That's what I used to get paid.
Yeah, pretty roughly. I never boundary umpired. Yeah. So I'm going to be a bit of an umpiring stuff.
Here we go.
But no, so like early on, I remember the first ever game I umpired was like a practice match, like a junior practice match. It would have been like under 10s or 12s or something. And I finished the game and the feedback I got was like really, really positive. And really naively, I was like, oh, well, that means I'm like really good. I guess I'll keep going with this. As it then progressed, though, I did start to move through grades pretty quick, which is not an uncommon thing. And I reckon for the first, all the way through my junior umpiring career and then into starting to do senior footy locally, you sort of think you're probably a little bit better than what you are because local footy, they really want to try and get you up to the top. One, because they're just short on numbers.
You're young and youthful. And
correct. But then two, it's also like, I mean, the more they can sort of keep younger umpires in it and sort of promote and get more going, like it just helps the league out. So you sort of go through, like, getting to senior footy, and then once you get up to state league, you realise that you're just the same as the other 50 guys that got promoted that year, who all thought they were the best at, like, in their own leagues respectively, and you all come together. But I think it was probably that point of getting up to state league was one step that I went, I've definitely got a bit of a career here. But my first couple of years at state league, I definitely sort of knew, all right, I know I'm at a level that stacks up with all these other guys who are coming up from local, from other leagues, if not outperforming, and sort of had that feeling that, I could definitely make it if I really tried hard enough. It's going to be difficult, but I sort of always had that inkling that I have enough natural talent, which is a strange thing. It's like, who has natural talent for umpiring? But I always sort of had that feel that a lot of the things haven't been really difficult in terms of picking up all the positioning stuff, like the laws knowledge and all of that type of stuff that we have to do was never a real struggle. But then working on it to keep getting better was the process part was like really enjoyable. So when combination of that, I go, regardless of then how far I get to, like I know I'm probably going to be able to go a reasonable way.
Mm-hmm. What's the progression plan look like?
So from an umpiring sense?
Yeah, you're a little Nick. What is
13-year-old me.
Does someone come to you and go, we see, talent in you, we see, a future, something like that? Like, what does that whole process look like? Because I'm sure very rarely someone gets exposed to that pathway. I'm sure we've all heard of cricket, footy, athletics, etc., pathways, basketball, whatever you want to call it. Like, so we know someone that's been through pathways, but I don't think anyone really has any idea of like an umpiring pathway. What's that look like?
It's a really interesting one, and it's changed a lot since I went through it, and it changes every couple of years, to be honest, because they come up with a new system of what's better, what's not. The progression of like the women's game now has changed our pathway slightly compared to when I first came through, and that wasn't really a thing yet. But yeah, like, so in terms of right at the beginning, you just start doing junior games, start working through the grades. So you start at 10s, 14s, 16s, like ultimately trying to get into like senior footies where you want to be. So I did a couple of years of senior footy at local level, did a Division 2 grand final at the time, which most probably like going through, typically you kind of want to be doing Division 1 before you get up to state league. But I was sort of still at that point where I'd only really done like 25, 30 senior games, and then did a senior grand final, which is a pretty quick progression. At that sort of point, it then comes down to like, your local coaches will then sort of nominate you based on who they think has enough talent. So I was pretty lucky. I had a couple of like ex-AFL umpires who were my coaches coming through local footy. So that also gave me a good amount of confidence. Like, all right, they know what they're doing. They've done AFL grand finals. They've done 200, 300 plus games. Like, if they're putting me up saying, yeah, you're good enough, like I must have something.
Yeah.
From there, you get to state league, so VFL level, which encompasses VFL football, the old TSC Cup, the NAB League now, boys and girls now. It was just boys when I came through. We also had like the VFL reserves or the development league comp, which doesn't exist, and then the VFLWs within that as well. So first year up is pretty much under 18s. You want to be in the 18s. Like that's where it starts to split in terms of you get your opportunity in the 18s, you do really well, you stay there. If you're not doing great.
Is it a similar pathway to being a player?
Kind of.
Kind of sounds like it, yeah.
Kind of. We have a couple of squads. So we have like a senior squad, which will do the VFL senior footy. And then we have like a development list that there's opportunities to do senior footy, but you got to be really good.
Yeah.
Like if you're coming straight out of local, like very rare that someone will come out first year out of local footy and go straight in the ones. Like it just doesn't happen. You got to sort of do your time a bit. But yeah, a couple of years of 18s, and then you work your way into that senior group. Once you're in that senior group, you then got to fight for your spot and keep your spot. Outside of that, then once you're in that sort of senior football space, then you're starting to get watched from an AFL perspective.
Yeah.
So they'll, like, our coaches identify who's doing well, who's worthy to be looked at. AFL then come around, they invite you to talent championships, like I did down the 16 national champs, 2017. They start looking at things like that. You start getting selected for AFLW. That's then part of our pathway up to AFL men's football.
Yep.
Of which, done that a couple of seasons now. And then from there, it's whoever's the best in the country, which is one of those difficult things for us. We're competing against the Victorian umpires for spots in the AFL list. There might be one or two that open up each year, but then you don't really know. You know a few guys from like going and doing those talent camps. Like you know guys in other states, but we have no idea who's going well in WA halfway through the year.
Yeah.
And what that means, and it's different football, and like South Australia have a few different rules, so that changes the
100%.
game style. Like that's where you sort of just got to keep putting your best foot forward, and then hopefully the phone call goes your way.
Yeah. What are your KPIs? Like, what do you get measured on?
So we get measured on a handful of like really core competencies. Most of it is like for us from a field umpire perspective, decision making is our first and foremost. Like,
how do you measure that?
Well,
I think this is a challenge that every business faces.
Yeah.
How do you measure decision making? Let alone being an umpire. I'm correlating the two over here.
Part of it is objective.
Yeah.
Because we have a really clearly set out law book.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
The other part of it is very subjective because we have interpretations of those laws.
Yeah.
So something quite objective is like, for example, a high contact is a high contact.
Yep.
Like if you're hit above the shoulders, it's high. Mm-hmm. The interpretation to that though is if you go and pick up the ball and you run into a stationary tackler, it's not high anymore.
Yeah.
But so we get assessed, like we'll have a coach. VFL senior footy is great. Lower down than that, we actually don't have a coach at every game. So that's where it gets hard to get feedback. So at this point, it's a bit easier. So every game we have a coach who goes through. They're basically sitting in the box writing down every decision. At AFL level, they use the ARC. So where you see the score review on TV, there's a room next to that. Someone's job is to sit there and call out every decision. Yeah. They code all of it, as you would with like kicks, handballs and stuff. It's like champion data, but like umpiring decisions. Mm-hmm. Then there's a third person who goes back and watches every decision and assesses them correct or incorrect, and then why. Yeah. And then they correlate it with the coach. Whereas our one is a bit more manual, so we don't have the ARC system, but they code pretty much everything. Go through most of the time, you're able to have a conversation about it later, and sort of, if you don't agree with what the coach said because you had a better look or a different look, a lot of the time you get caught out by reverse camera angles. So if I'm on the centre of the ground here, I can't see the far side, but the camera's over there, and the coach goes, "Well, why didn't you see that?" It's like, well,
I'm with you.
So, like, we get largely graded on decision making, but then within that, even that example there of where am I positioned, like, our positioning is everything. Yeah. You get yourself in the right spot, you get the free kick, and you get it correct. Work rate is another one. Like, if you're in the right spot quick enough, and regularly enough and consistently enough, you're going to make more accurate decisions because you're more relaxed, calm, composed.
Is this like a meters per minute thing?
Not really. That's a very subjective work rate.
Okay.
It's more of a coach's feel on what, like, and it's, when I say it's obvious, I mean,
I know what you mean.
If I was to go and watch,
you can tell
guys umpire. You can tell who's working hard and who's not, and who's working enough and who's not. And then other things is like match management. So how are you communicating with players? Yeah. Any volatile situations that pop up, how did you deal with that? Like, if there was a report, what was your process with that? Things like blood rules and all the little bits and pieces.
Yeah, the intricacies.
Yeah, so there's quite a lot of things going on. Yeah.
Is it like a reporting thing? You get given a report after a game, or is it more informal?
The process of that has changed a lot at state league level since I got there. Yeah. It very much was. It used to be basically a point system. Mm-hmm. So you would start at like 140 points, and you would lose points. So if you had a recall bounce, it was like minus 2 points or something. If you had a straight bounce, that one. This is the thing. So it's like umpiring has always been very negative. Yeah. And because everyone from a football perspective expects us to be perfect. Yeah. So it's like that's why we had this point system. They've changed it now, so we get ranked on these competencies based on like it's like I think the ratings were excellent, very good, solid. Requires attention.
Solid?
No, so solid's not a great description, but it is because...
I've just never heard that used in a scale system before.
Yeah, so solid means you're at the standard.
Yeah. Minimum.
Which, well, not minimum. So if you're getting solids in every game in the VFL, you're doing your job.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
If you want to be in the finals, though, you got to be very good or excellent in those categories because that's our distinguishing factor. If you're like a needs attention... Yeah. That means that you probably didn't have a great game. Yeah. But then within that, so like decision making wise, to get a solid at VFL level, I think it's like 3 to 5 errors in decision making, which could be you paid the wrong free kick. Yeah. You missed a free kick, so you didn't pay anything when you should have. Like those are assessed similarly. So, but then based on the kind of error, like if it's a major or a minor, so if someone's head gets ripped off, it's a major free kick. You probably should have paid it. Yeah. So that then gets graded differently, but. So we get those competencies as gradings, and then we get like 2 to 3 points of feedback. Yeah. Outside of that, we then get game vision. So within that 2 to 3 points of feedback on areas to improve, positive things we did, we'll then get those key points as part of our game vision at the end. So we'll get like 10 or 12 clips just usually. Huddle. Huddle clips. Yep. And it will be if one of the areas to improve was say holding the ball for the day, you might get 2 or 3 holding the balls. That you just got to think back through the process of what you did. Here's the correct outcome. Here's what you processed. Like, where's the missing link? And it's a lot more positive now in terms of we're trying to help you get better rather than back in the day it was, well, you just lost all these points, so you're going to get dropped. Yeah. There's still a bit of an element of that. Like, if you're not performing, you don't get games. But
is there an element because the numbers are so thin that's hard to implement as well?
Do you think? So, at our level, it's still pretty competitive. Yeah. Because we're at a point where we've got more than enough numbers to cover our games. Yeah. Some circumstances we have a few injuries, like it gets a bit tight. Yeah. But there's always someone pushing up. So like our development list, like if we got a lot of senior injuries and guys aren't performing, someone will come up and take a spot. But like at local level, like guys are doing like 2, 3, 4 games a weekend because they just don't have the numbers. So it's at that level, it's like you could be underperforming but still getting good games. Our level, if you're really underperforming, you just won't be in. Yeah. So there is, like, it does mean a fair bit. And then even more so at the top end, like we lose, when I say we lose, the AFL drop down a few guys every week who aren't in the AFL, who are still running to keep them going. Mm-hmm. Like for those guys, like, if they're not performing in the AFL, they'll be back in the VFL, which no one wants to be. And the same for us. If we're not in the VFL and we're in the 18s, like you want to be in senior footy.
Yeah. Just normal team selection.
Normal team selection. Yep. Normal team selection. But that's where, I mean, like any other team, like, all right, one of your more experienced umpires, maybe if they underperformed a week, they're not going to get instantly dropped because you back them in to recover and go again next week. Whereas someone who's a bit younger, typically, actually something that's been really good from an umpiring sense, is that really typically if someone gets promoted though, someone comes up, generally speaking, you're going to get 2 games in a row. So even if you have a bad first one, you get the opportunity to redeem yourself the next week, which might still mean you get dropped, but at least you get a second crack. And you sort of know that going in.
Yeah.
Very rare that you're 1 game in, 1 game out.
Not so volatile.
Yeah. Where from a playing sense, like you might be, like some of those guys might be the sub 1 week, come on for a quarter, have a blinder, and then they get dropped.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Ours is a bit different because
from a sport perspective, like cricket comes to mind when that happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a volatile X's and O's, I guess, or 1s and 0s. Yeah. Before I go into that, give me your top 3, top 5 games, moments that you've been a part of specifically. It's all good while I talk about this stuff, but I'm imagining for people not imagining you out in the middle of the ground because if you do a good job, we don't notice you.
Yep.
Yeah. Plain and simple.
And it's a really strange feeling because we don't win or lose either.
No.
So I come off the ground and I know if I've had a good game or not.
You've got no song to sing.
But well, that's the thing. And I guess like so in terms of top 3, I'll go 3, 2, 1 because that sort of comes to mind. But 3 AFLW Grand Final last year.
Yep.
The reason that sits at 3 is because the next 2 games are pretty special. But
see, I know this because I know I pay attention now. But prior to that, not a clue.
So 3 AFLW Grand Final, and interesting. Like part of that is, so we flew in on like the Saturday up to Brisbane. We do the game on the Sunday, come off the field. That's great. We have our own sort of pretty quiet sort of celebration in the rooms. We were back on a flight that night, straight back to Melbourne, landed at 1:30 in the morning on the Monday morning. So whereas like the players stay on, like they're celebrating, even losing team will go out and do something. Like it's a bit of a different feeling. You come off the ground and go, well, grand final's over.
Yeah, clock out.
We're just wait. We finished the game. We're just waiting on the interchange bench for the presentations. Like one of our umps goes up, collects all the medals, comes off, and then we just disappear in the rooms. It's just, when I say it's just another game of football. It definitely isn't. But I mean, from a day perspective, doing a grand final is always special.
Yeah.
But it's one of those ones that it's not like playing where like you have a bad day and you're like, I didn't really feel it.
Yeah.
Like emotionally, it's like you just sort of move on to the next one and, all right, why do we have a bad day or why do we have a good day? Go on to the next.
You've got to have an absolute howler to remember it, I can imagine.
Yeah. Number 2, I didn't actually umpire in, but I was on the bench for. I was on the bench for the Jamie Elliott goal against Essendon.
I think I saw you on camera that game.
If you watch, they played at Brownlow night, and I got really excited. If you watch the reverse angle of that goal, that you can see the bench. Of it. I'm standing on the bench because obviously siren goes. So as the emergency umpire on the bench, our job is to make sure the guys stay off the ground. Because if they run on, like all hell breaks loose. Particularly as well if the game's not officially over yet.
Yeah.
Which happened in a W game. So it wasn't a game I was part of it, but happened. It was a mess. But I'm on the bench, like trying to keep the Collingwood boys back because they obviously know, all right, if he kicks it, we're just going to go here. And then trying to keep the Essendon team and staff and like you got like 30 or 40 people you're trying to keep off the ground.
Yeah, no one sees you in that moment either.
No. And then, I mean, you've got, like, I can't remember what the crowd was that day, but it was like 60, 65 plus thousand at the G. Hell of a game. Like, Bombers played out of their skin. Collingwood probably didn't play great, but like came back in. He kicks that goal and it just goes nuts. Yep. And you're like, yeah, this is pretty cool.
Can't take a step back and go, yeah, I was here for that.
Which I mean, like, it's pretty cool going and watching those games. And like, I've definitely been in the stands, like watching good games of footy. But to be on the ground being like immersed in that moment, and then just having a bulk group of people rush past you and being like, that's a pretty cool.
It's like one of those movie scenes where you're just kind of standing there and
100% like that. Just that like 30-second period, and I mean even the lead up play to that, you could see it happening from a mile away, sitting on the bench.
Yeah.
And I've got the game clock right next to me, so I know exactly how long is left.
It's a nice thing, isn't it? That's what I find at the AFLW games is like when I sit there, I actually see how much time's left, and it's a nice power position for me to have.
it's pretty cool. But then I'm commed up as well, so on the bench we're all commed up, ready to go just in case.
Yeah.
So I can hear what the guys are saying to the players on the ground. I can hear them setting like Jamie Elliott up, telling him to go wider in the boundary line to get on his correct line.
Get in the second row.
Yeah, like so you're fully immersed in it. You're not just another spectator. Like you're right in the game.
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool in terms of just experience of what that feels like. Number one though was coming on at halftime, round 10, Geelong, Gold Coast, 2021.
Yep. I actually watched that game. For some reason, I was watching that game, and I don't know why. I don't know. Might be a good luck charm. I don't know.
Oh, maybe. But yeah, it officially counts as my AFL debut, my one and only.
Yeah.
So
hey, it still counts.
If we never
You're
make
an AFL umpire now, mate.
If we never make it any further, I hold the record for the only person ever to wear
Shortest
the
amount of time.
number 48 on an AFL field, which is an exceptionally high number for an umpire. But yeah, I like that was an unreal experience because
was it a hammy?
No, it was a calf.
Cuff, yeah.
So I umpired the VFL the night before down at Frankston.
Yeah.
Ran 18.5K,
Go Dolphs.
19K.
Go Dolphs.
Go Dolphs. I don't know if they got up, actually. I couldn't tell you. Hell of a game, though, because it was like 35-minute quarters, like ran like 18.5, 19K. Got home at, I don't know, 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Like, wake up, got a 1:10 game down Geelong.
Yeah.
Sitting on the bench, and I go, cool, I'm just going to go sit down.
Feet up, have some ollies.
Funnily enough, so I like, you go down, like, all right, cool, guys are feeling really good, like, not a problem. Like, I carpooled with one of the other boys, and we were just, like, chatting about it. He's just like, oh, you'd hate to get on today, wouldn't you? And I'm like, no, come on. I'm like, not a chance. These three guys, like, they're fit, they're fine. First quarter, one of the boys goes, oh, yeah, calf's not feeling great. And I was like, cool. Like, to be completely honest, this happens regularly where guys say, and it's for them, for those guys to come off the ground, it needs to be pretty serious, because when I say they don't really want to put us on as, like, being rookie listed, they don't really want to have to put us under the pump like that, having done a game the day before.
Yeah.
Half time of that game, Gold Coast were only down by like 8 points.
Yeah.
So like it's a tight game at that point. I mean, Geelong blew them out after that. But in terms of like, they don't want to have to put us in that situation. They don't want to like let the game down as a result of someone coming on fatigued and like, who knows, like I could come on and cramp or whatever, like all sorts of issues. We get to half time, we go in the rooms, the other bloke's done his calf, gets on a bike, spinning up. Our newly appointed head coach was the game day coach that day. He comes in the rooms and goes, oh, just warm up just in case. Like, you get asked to warm up every couple of times you sit the bench because you never know.
Yep.
Warm up at halftime. We go back out. I'm still in the tracksuit. Walk out behind the guys. It's all good. They get to the middle of the ground. Takes 2 steps and he just says on the comms, he's like, nah.
I'm done.
At that point, I don't, like, that's probably the first real time in my umpiring career where...
Is that a stomach drop moment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was physically like shaking, going, it's actually happening here.
Yep.
And the worst, when I say the worst part about it was I'm in the middle of GMHBA, so I got, and like our phones get locked away like an hour and a half before the game.
You can't tell anyone.
I can't tell anyone that I'm about to go on. Yeah. So my parents had no idea. My family had no idea.
I remember.
And it was just a mad scramble.
I remember Maddie's post, maybe?
Yeah.
I think she put up a post about it,
Yeah, my girlfriend posted, and then it was just a mad scramble of like people sending text messages. Like all the boys who had out umpiring VFL that day had no idea. So they're like jumping on their phones going, what the hell's going on? I'm sitting there in the middle of GMHBA, pants from my ankles, like match kit on underneath, but I couldn't get my tracksuit over my boots. So I'm there, pants around my ankles, boots everywhere.
Need the button on.
I've got our Matchcom guy, because our vests get hooked up to broadcast and us. Mm-hmm. So I've got my shirt up like this. Like, if you're listening to this, it's not going to make any sense. But I've got my shirt up, pants around my ankles.
We can imagine.
He's trying to switch it all so it stays permanently on rather than click on, click off. And then I'm like, I actually have to umpire here.
Yeah.
And so they're like, oh, like, park yourself down one end for the first couple of minutes, warm yourself up, and then get into the game when you feel ready. Came into the game, like, first stint in the middle, it was a pretty surreal thing because you go into, I had a boundary throw in. I remember it so clear. You go ask the nominations for the rucks, and like Tom Hawkins is coming in. We've got Joel Selwood there.
Yeah.
Like all these guys that I've grown up watching on TV play football, you're now in and amongst that, and it's not a practice. Like, this is a live game, AFL footy. So
it's also a great visually appealing ground to be at too, GMHB. When you stand in the middle, you go, yeah, this is cool. Especially now with the new stand.
Yeah.
Was the new stand done?
No. Nah, so this was before they even knocked it down. So it was the old stand.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a pretty unreal feeling. And then I only had to pay one free kick for the day, and I got it correct. It's a really obvious holding the man. Bounced at 100%. I had 3 bounces. All 3 went straight up. So again, if I retire, I've done one AFL game and I bounced at 100%. So the best bouncing record in the history of the AFL. It was just really cool.
You're going to pay for that one later.
Yeah, 100%. But that's right. We'll
clip it.
We'll take it. But yeah, it was that's by far. I mean, you set out to want to umpire AFL footy at like age 15 or 16 when I was like, all right, I can see there's progression here. Like, I want to try and see how far we can go. And then to be, 10 or 11 years later, out on an AFL ground.
Yep.
Actually umpiring a live AFL game. Yes, it was only a half, but, I mean, pretty ridiculous to sort of, like, think about it afterwards. And it just went by so quick. Like, that was the fastest half of football, like, in terms of perception of time. Physically, actually, much easier than the night before. Well, you know where the ball's going. Like,
you're also hyped up on 200 milligram of adrenaline.
I had so much running through. And they were like, oh, you ran really well. Like, you recovered really well. I'm like, I actually don't know how.
Can't feel my feet, but anyway.
Yeah. I was real sore the next day. But then just from a timing perspective as well, like the thing after that, so they were going to give me the week off the next week from running completely because they're like, you've just done 1.5 full games. Yeah. They were going to fly me to Darwin to sit the bench just as a bit of a nice, like, well done, like, bit of a reward. Melbourne went to lockdown on the Thursday. Yeah, sure. So I got a phone. I didn't even get a phone call. I got an email saying you're not on the flight anymore because we don't know if we can get you home.
Yep.
So it went from this massive high to then I actually don't know when I'm going to umpire again.
2-week holiday.
Well, VFL dissipated as soon as we went to lockdowns. That stopped.
Yeah, done. Yeah.
It wasn't in any AFL game. So I then didn't umpire actually for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So it was this really weird sort of feeling. But yeah, that's by far career highlight.
Yeah. Where you at now? Well, I know where you're at, but where you're at now and the second coming off that, what do you need to do to get back to that?
Yeah, so right now, going back into another VFL season. Came off AFLW last year. Obviously, we had 2 seasons last year. Season 6, Season 7.
Don't remind me.
That was a hell of a 12-month period.
Yeah, don't remind me.
Yeah, so went through that. Season 6 wasn't great for me. Got injured. First only real injury of my career, which then meant I missed the first 9 weeks of VFL, which really hurt me from a selection perspective. Yep. So I was going really well with 2021. Had I been able to put together a full VFL season last year, would have been very close. Yep. Phone call didn't go my way end of the year in terms of promotion. So it was actually, in terms of timing, in hindsight, I was starting to get to a point in the year where I went, it's been a hard year because I got injured, so I haven't been umpiring a lot. Yep. Did 10 rounds of VFL final, had to go straight. The next week, I got a phone call on the Monday saying, yep, you didn't make it to week 2 of VFL finals. Like, you basically needed a miracle because you did half the season. Like, you needed something pretty good to happen. I was like, yeah, fair enough. The next morning, I got a phone call saying you're on a flight to Perth to go and umpire AFLW. Yeah. So again, this sort of like roller coaster of ups and downs. But leading into, I think it was the last round, would have been round 10 of AFLW, had the Friday night at Icon Park, Carlton Bulldogs. The day before, I got a phone call saying I wasn't getting promoted to the AFL. So that was pretty rough. So having had what I thought was maybe enough of a year, and going to 4-ump in the AFL next year meant there was quite a few spots up for grabs. Yeah. So that was pretty disappointing, but in terms of opportunity now, it's just get back in and just have a full VFL season. So that's sort of where I'm at, and not to say as long as I have a good season, I'm going to go up, but it's the type of thing, it's like, it just gives me more of an opportunity. Continuity, get a full season, but then I sort of look at it a bit selfishly for me and go, a lot of those guys that I would have normally been competing against did get promoted. Yep. So I'm sort of moving up in terms of the order anyway. A lot of old guys at the AFL who've been around forever. There's going to be opportunity. Just got to sort of do my time a little bit, but plenty of good stuff in this next 12 months. Like I'll tick over 50 VFL games, I think around 5 or 6, which is pretty cool.
Nice.
So yeah, sort of an interesting sort of phase, but yeah, to get to that next level, realistically, it's just like get some really good footy over the next 6 to 12 months. A lot of it's then out of your hands. I mean, if they want to pick you, they want to pick you. Which, yeah, I'm heading in the right direction. I just got to get a little bit more consistent and have a good year.
Before we dive down more sports science things, what's a normal week look like? What's a pre-season week look like? What's an in-season week look like? Or game day week?
Yeah, so pre-season at the moment, a lot of conditioning. Well, that's just normal anyway.
Define a lot.
I'm running. I actually had a look the other day. On average, I'm about.
You looking at data? Oh, shock me. Shock me.
Especially my running data. What a surprise.
Yeah, who would have thought?
Who would have thought? Running about 40 to 50 Ks each week.
Across 4 sessions?
Yeah, 4 heading into 5 sessions this week will be the first time I do 5. So that's just running. Generally then have a bike session, just a steady state bike, just as a bit of a break the week up, go out for a coffee shop ride on a weekend. Got a swim in there, and then three lifts at the moment, plus like a field session, which is a bit of change of direction stuff. So pretty busy week. I'm like in terms of what that looks like. It's Monday, Wednesday, Friday lift, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday run, Saturday bike, Wednesday swim after lift, and then Tuesday or Thursday, depending on what my working week looks like with that field session. Once we then get in season, ours is a bit, when I say a bit all over the place, because we then start getting a bit dictated by what the clubs do.
Yep.
So we'll go back, we're actually going back first week of Feb as a VFL group, so we'll start training
still
together.
At Icon?
No, we're at Victoria Park for VFL.
Yep.
We go back as a group beginning of Feb. Tuesday, Thursday nights is our main conditioning nights. So we'll do our running-based stuff, and then we'll do some, when I say skills, like we're not going around kicking footies. We do sometimes, but we're more looking at it from setting it up
but
from
there's a
an
reason you're
umpiring
umpires,
perspective.
because you can't kick a footy. So
You'd be surprised. We
I
zip
know.
it around. We're pretty bloody good.
that's just one of those shivs I like to just twist.
Yeah. No, we fly it around. We quite often say we get a game in the 18s. We wouldn't get a game in VFL footy. We get a game in the 18s as like 25, 26-year-olds. But yeah, so we have our key nights, and then depending on what happens during the week, so we'll start going out and doing, we call them club visits.
Yep.
So we'll come out, and it might be a lighter session with the club, going through some new rules.
They're fun nights because everyone asks 1,000 questions.
Yeah, which is great. Like that's what we're there for. Like we go into those wanting to help.
Yeah,
clubs
we've
out.
had a few come down and everyone just asks some questions. You can see they're just getting worse.
Yeah, and like that's it's a type of thing.
It's a good and bad place to be.
Yeah, sometimes it's good, but then from a conditioning sense, our week is dictated by what happens in those. Like from a club perspective, if you guys decide, no, we're doing 3 15-minute match sim blocks. That's a very different conditioning load to us just coming down, answering some questions and doing a little drill. Yeah. So we then have to adjust and shift to that. Obviously, when practice matches start coming in, that's our main conditioning on the weekend. And it, like realistically, we end up looking a bit more like what a footy club might look like, except our additional sessions, instead of being skill sessions or whatever, are looking at vision, assessing decision-making stuff, and then just some general conditioning to just keep things ticking along. And then that really carries throughout the rest of the season.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
If you were in charge, is there a change you would make? Knowing from a sports science background, because you're probably...
Yeah.
I don't know what the other jobs that umpires have, but I'm sure you are a little bit more informed than some others.
Yeah.
I'm just stereotyping that. I don't really know, but...
Oh, no. It's like, there's definitely moments where I go, I probably wouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
Having said that, though...
Do you have to get over that hurdle yourself, or do you trust?
Early on, I did.
Yeah.
But then I'm more in a position now where I go, I'm here to train. I'm here as an athlete.
Yeah. An old soul.
Not necessarily, it's not my responsibility to worry about that. But handing off the responsibility of programming and all that is actually really good.
It's a nice weight off your shoulders too.
I can just come in and just focus on what I need to do. Yes, there's some things I might agree or disagree with, but at the same time, there's a lot of biases that I have with my own training because I have that next level comparative to the average in terms of physiologically, what are we doing in this session?
Yeah.
I also then really know physiologically how that matches up with my own athletic profile.
Yeah.
So I know going into it, I'm like, this session's going to suck.
Yeah.
But it's not going to suck for everyone, but I know it's going to suck for me because of where I'm at and
Yeah.
what I'm good and not so good at.
Yeah.
So getting past some of that and going, well, no, I understand what we're trying to achieve from a programming sense here. Like, there's definitely times where I'll have conversations around, like, more so just trying to understand how someone else is programming. I think that's a really useful tool.
Yeah.
But
Which makes up a large portion
Yeah.
of the decision making anyway.
Yeah.
It's just our own biases or the way that we like to do things.
100%. And I mean, also from a side of things that my professional work is in a very different physiological profile to what I actually train and compete for myself.
Yeah.
I'm not going out there and doing a 4-hour plus event every week. Like, yes, it's 2 hours, but it's intermittent. There's change direction. Like, there's very different demands. So that's where I'm more than happy to trust someone who's got more experience from a professional sense in that setting. But more than anything, it's like, I just want to go and train.
Yeah.
Like, I just want to be an athlete for a bit.
Yeah. Which is why you've just hired
Athletes Authority.
Yeah,
So finally was like, I need an S&C coach.
Yep.
Like, the conditioning stuff, I still have a lot of control of, particularly this time of year. But even then, I've sort of said, like, I just need someone to set it out.
Yeah.
I'll come in and put some input in, like any athlete would, and be like, oh,
Correct,
can we try this, whatever. But just handle that responsibility off. 'Cause, like, it's the last thing you want to get to sometimes at the end of the week is, all right, I've written programs for however many athletes for this week or this month. I've gone in, just done a bunch of testing, recommendations, all of that type of stuff at work. Oh, now I have to write my own program for next week.
Yeah.
And it's like you got biases, you take shortcuts. I'm like, nah, I just want someone to tell me what to do. I'll come in and get it done.
Yeah.
Challenge me, and I'll challenge you back. But, like,
Yeah.
again, scrap that responsibility. And that's been really good. Like, I don't reckon I've trained for quite some time this well, particularly in this sort of off-season, pre-season-y block.
Yeah.
And recovered really well and got as much total volume in for quite some time, purely because I know that if I don't, like, I'm booking in going, I'm going to be at the gym at 6 a.m. on a Monday morning. Woke up this morning, I was like, if I wasn't, like, if someone wasn't not on my back about it, but if I don't feel,
You don't have
if
the
I'm doing it
support
myself,
to-
like,
yeah.
I'm probably waking up this morning going, now I'll sleep in a bit more.
Yeah.
Whereas it's like, no, this morning I got up and it's like, I just got to get there. I just got to get it done.
Yeah.
Which has been great.
What are some of the blind spots they've covered in your training that you, one, didn't see or chose not to address?
I reckon a lot of it's just taking my strength programming to a better level.
Yeah.
Like, I know enough, but I just don't work in it.
Yeah.
So that side of things in terms of being a bit more creative with what that looks like has made it more interesting. Even the last little while, like, I've never really properly front squatted for any
I was just thinking about
length of
front
time.
squatting for you too, which was kind of weird. But
Yeah.
anyway.
But, like, my entire last block was front squat.
Yeah.
And, like, I've never really sort of had that as an emphasis or a focus. But last block been really, really good. And then even just the, like, trusting that someone knows that, like, from a load perspective, like, going into the gym and knowing, all right, I feel confident enough to lift heavy today because it's not going to be an issue, rather than me sort of half questioning out going, well, I know it's probably going to be all right, but have I actually got the balance right? It's just, again, palm off responsibility. But, like, I know, this morning, for example, it's like I go in and do a reasonably heavy lift. I know I'm going to be fine to run tomorrow, which previously I'd never, I'd be questioning that.
Yeah.
And so, I'll just go a bit easier in the gym today. Whereas, like, a pretty solid program. So a lot of that side, which probably also came from getting injured last year and going, what I was previously doing wasn't enough.
Yeah.
So that's been a major one. Outside of that, then really nothing. That's probably the biggest part. It's just like strength, power, speed development just isn't what I do for a job.
Yeah.
So find someone who's really good at that and get them to fill the gap.
Yeah. What have you enjoyed most about it besides being able to kind of release control of it?
Probably just the confidence of pushing a bit harder.
Yeah.
Like like I said, very rarely, if any, front squat ever.
My favourite. I'm built
but,
the front squat.
But last week hit 67.5.
Yep.
For what? 4s.
Yep.
I think. which I'd never got anywhere close to. But again, it's one of those things that at this time of year I would have gone, oh yeah, I know I need to go heavy, but like, I don't want to really be too sore.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that, like, as we know with strength training, like, it's an accumulation to X.
Yeah.
Like, if you try and do that session in 6 weeks' time after not having done anything for 5.5 weeks, then it's going to hurt.
Yeah.
But the consistency, and we'll come back to continuity again, of being able to do it and not have to think about it necessarily, just turn up and do it, makes you better in the long run. And I guess, I mean, speaking from here, from Virtus' point of view, like, lots of people have just come off Christmas holidays, New Year's, everything like that, and you know, you have a little hiatus from the gym, and that's what I've been saying. Well, I find myself saying a lot in the last kind of 2 or 3 weeks is, the first session's going to hurt. You haven't lost anything. It's just your body's ability to adapt to the stimulus has just changed slightly. So it's going to hurt. You'll be fine after it. You're going to get some DOMs.
You'll be okay. But
pretty much suck it up. You're going to be okay.
It's just this little period that you got to get through. But no, that's been really good. And then ultimately, that's like just fed back into running again. I mean, I was pretty cooked after the last 12 months because it was a long 12 months. Like, yes, I wasn't umpiring a lot, but just the emotional and mental strain of going, well, like, and this is the insight into the umpiring world. I was driving to see my own physio because that was the only, like, if I'd rocked up to training on a Tuesday night, we've got 75, 80 of us at training, one physio.
Gross.
So you're waiting, mate. I waited an hour to see a physio one night, just to check in to make sure that things weren't going backwards. And in the end, didn't see the physio, so I booked my own appointment outside of that. So like I was driving, like I live like Bayside Way. I was driving to Heidelberg every Wednesday for like 10 weeks to go see a physio. Plus then going into the city twice to go to training, even though I wasn't technically training. I was doing my rehab. Like all of that, I was just cooked, and then just trying to come into a VFL men's season, having done no pre-season.
And work.
And work.
And be a good partner.
And got COVID through that, and like all the other things that just add up.
Had it yet?
Lucky you.
Feel different.
But like I just got to the end of last year, and I was like, I'm just wrecked. But like, I feel amazing now, and it's only really been a month since, or just over a month since I actually technically finished the season.
I feel you, and I'm sure if I feel the same way, and you know, I'm not an elite athlete anymore, no surprises, of course, but just like the whole, I mean, obviously for the last 2.5 years, like the mental load and strain of just living, I guess, like takes it out more than what you think, and I'm in the similar 100%. Boat recently of being pretty quiet for the last kind of 4 to 6 weeks, and like, I don't think I realised that I didn't feel cooked or exhausted in the moment. And even looking back now, I still feel like I cope with it okay. But now playing golf 3 times a week, you know,
it's not a bad lifestyle.
It's not a bad lifestyle, and like I guess that part of it, like that's filling the void of like an escape that I didn't get the opportunity to have, which I think people underrate, like highly. And even just little things like spending some time down the beach, like having a bit of a paddle around, anything like that. Like it's one of those things that I think we get exposed to it more during a holiday or Christmas, New Year, January period that I think we miss from February to November, if we just want to generalise and call it that, which I think takes a bigger toll and pushing you in the right direction more often than not. That I don't know if there's a way that we can bring it back to that, but the way that we can kind of tick those boxes or do those little things more often in the middle of the year, that helps us not feel so bad at the end of the year. I don't know. It's just something I was thinking about the other day. Which I don't know how you do that, but
I don't think there's ever a perfect answer to it, but I mean, just getting, well, apart from anything, I just like setting up the good like little habits. Like, so I've gotten into this routine now where it's like, because I'm lifting 3 days a week, and like Monday, Wednesday, I was like, I've got the option to lift later in the day. Let's lift at 6 a.m. because I know I have to work.
100%.
I know I have to work 6 a.m.
Advocate.
But I know I have to work 6 a.m. on a Tuesday and a Thursday commonly. So now, instead of being like, oh, no, I'll sleep in a bit here and there, it's just like, no, I have this really consistent sleep routine just as a byproduct of the fact that I'm getting up and training.
It just makes you feel better for the day too.
So everything else is now snowballing out of the fact that I've like got this good consistency.
So many more hours in the day too.
100%.
Like, I'm a huge advocate for morning training.
You feel awesome after
I can't. Not anymore. I mean, I don't know how I used to do it. Like, drove up into the city 3-4 times a week for cricket. Like, I don't know how I used to do that after school. Like, especially now, like, I start my day at 6 a.m. Every day besides Monday. That's when I get to Monday and I'm like, you know what? I think I just want to get up early today. And like, not knowing me, and like I do my programs on a Sunday, and it still takes me X amount of hours and I still finish at, stupid o'clock, but I get up early on a Monday. Like this morning I went for a walk, didn't really do much, just kind of like no phone time. And I was like, I feel way better.
This is great.
Getting to like Thursday, for an example, I start a little bit later and I get up kind of 7:30. I'm like, I feel like shit.
That's the bit that like I don't necessarily like looking forward to going back as a group to train. Is like I have to run Tuesdays and Thursdays at night in the city after being in the car for an hour. We then sit in a coaching room for an hour and then we have to warm up and try and run. Yeah, and we have to run hard. Gross. So it's like that for me. It's like one of the motivating factors to get to the AFL is they have a much more flexible schedule. They can train when they like. Yeah. That's probably the part that over the next, heading into next month, that'll be a bit sort of frustrating and sort of break that routine a bit. But then once I've got that okay, then it's kind of like, all right, we just change and adjust. Yeah. It's just a new way of going about it.
Excellent. Before we touch on nutritional strategies, give me a little insight into your experiences in the US and maybe a little bit of Mets as well, like that sports science side of Nick. What did Michigan show you or open your eyes to that you didn't have previously, especially being over here? It's still quite a youthful industry, but also like kind of what's your life look like at Mets? Who do you look after? What's a week look like? How do you work that in with your own training, your own life? But I guess, start on Michigan and then we'll work towards Mets and we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, so Michigan was a while ago now, 2016. That came about just as trying to get experience in the industry. Yeah. And at that point in time, I definitely did want to be a traditional S&C, working a gym floor. But that was also the biggest turning point in terms of understanding that that's probably not what I actually wanted to do day in, day out. And learnt through being there as well that the conditioning side was definitely something I was more interested in. So that was when I say semi-internship, I wasn't there for a full semester because it clashed with the footy season. So I was at a point where initially I was actually going to go to Iowa. They wanted me to go in August and go for a full semester. Glad I didn't, because in the end I did the TAC Cup granny that year. Yeah. Which is a famous one because a Marty kick misses the goal after the time. Yeah, exactly. So another clip that I'm in the background of. I'm standing right behind him. But in terms of heading over there, that was with Olympic sports, so everything but football and basketball. Mm-hmm. I met Jim Harbaugh's dad. That was exciting.
Who's that for anyone who has no idea?
So Jim Harbaugh's the
We're not all Michigan fanatics like you.
No, he's the coach in Michigan, but he coached the 49ers in the NFL, and his brother coaches at Baltimore. And didn't meet him, but he met his dad, who's also like a very famous name, particularly Michigan. But so that was a really just interesting experience in terms of how they go about it over there in terms of athletic development, performance. Seeing their facilities and I guess just the resources that they have.
Space.
Unbelievable. I went back a few years later and they built a new facility. It was like $350 million.
Crazy.
Absurd. Someone just donated the money too.
Oh, it's dumb.
But basically like 5 days a week, some occasional Saturdays, but Monday to Friday, it was 6 a.m. till 8 p.m. Like get in, it's lifts like first thing in the morning, and then you'll go and do your conditioning blocks with teams mid-afternoon, and then come back and then more teams lifting in the afternoon. Yep. Good exposure to sports I hadn't been involved in as well. Like I did a lot of work with softball, lacrosse, things that you just don't really get here. But that's where largely like going and being in the gym and doing the lifting stuff, like learn a lot there. But again, that was something that really sort of went, this just isn't like going over. I was like, yeah, cool. I want to maybe one day go and work in the college or whatever. I was like, maybe I'll go back and work there, but just not in that role. Yep. You go out and do the conditioning sessions though, and I go, this is so much more enjoyable. This is much more what I want to do. Like on paper, for a lot of people, it probably goes, that's probably the lazy, boring programming side of things. It's like just guys running up and back to cones or whatever. It's like, no, the in-depth part behind it as to why we're doing it. It's the part that makes me interested. But then also I just saw the opportunity there too, because over in the US, like they really good coaches, really good strength coaches.
I think you can probably extrapolate that to a lot of the world.
And the conditioning's just like, what are you doing?
Yeah, strength and conditioning, my ass.
Yeah, you're a strength coach.
Strength or conditioning.
So that sort of started that, I guess, progression of me coming back and almost like for a while I was like identifying myself as a conditioning and strength coach in my own head, not publicly, but in my own head, because it was like, that's what I'm really good at. That's what I enjoy. apart from anything, that's the type of stuff that I largely train as well, even in umpiring sense. So then, learnt a lot. Even just going and, at that point I was still living at home. So like going and living somewhere completely different, having a fend for myself, learn a lot out of that.
It's got nothing tying you back here necessarily to either.
Yeah.
Freedom.
So that was a really sort of interesting, good experience. And then, coming back, it sort of set me up to have a bit better perspective on, all right, being a bit more resourceful too. It's like, I don't have all the stuff that we had there now.
Yeah.
Don't have the luxury of just going, all right, what equipment do I need and all that? Like
600 barbells.
Try and learn to be a bit more creative. Try and learn to be a bit more creative. But then also just sort of chase that opportunity from a conditioning side of things, which then led to inevitably Mets. So Luke and I actually met through umpiring. He got to state league level, and I rip into him about it. It's like, I've gone past
I'm
him
better than you, I'm sure he likes that.
Yeah. He always then just turns around and goes, I retired early. Like, come
Washed
on,
up.
mate. But yeah, from a Met side of things, he was starting everything up and sort of went, you interested in coming over doing some VO2 max testing, or sort of start up a bit of a lab, work with triathletes, runners. And I was like, fits this conditioning thing that I'm really interested in perfectly. And also it's flexible. Like, he understands what I do from an umpiring sense, which that's always been the hardest bit in terms of the industry, is finding things that are like, I was coming through uni, I could never do a placement because I was already at VFL level at that point. I couldn't do a placement in a footy club.
Yeah, I found that challenging.
Availability, I couldn't do it because they're like, we want Tuesday, Thursday nights, and then we want a weekend. I'm like, well, I train Tuesday, Thursday nights, and I don't know where I'm going on the weekend.
There's no adaptability.
But then also it's a conflict of interest. Like, if I go out on the weekend and I've got, I don't know, Sandringham Dragons and Oakley Chargers, but I'm working at Oakley during the week, like, you just can't do it. So that then limited me largely in terms of what I couldn't do from a work perspective, and that's where Mets was perfect, because it's like, I've got this opportunity where I can go and explore the conditioning stuff and really sort of take it whatever direction I end up wanting to do. Because at that point, like, even Luke didn't really fully know where the business was going to go.
I mean, do any of us know where any of the business is going to go?
Not really.
Coming from experience, and not in a hostile way.
Yeah.
No one knows what we're doing. Lucky he just walked in the room,
just walked in.
He's not going to hear us, which is not going to matter. Nick was just discussing that he had no idea where Mets was going, and I said we still don't know where we're going. So
it's not a bad spot to be in. But so that sort of gave me the license to sort of do what I wanted to do professionally, but then keep this umpiring thing going. Which has then worked out really, really well. So, as I said right at the start, largely it's now a lot of endurance, ultra endurance, and that's probably gone from having just a more broader, like, I want to be working in the conditioning space, like coupled in with some of the lab testing and the physiological testing, bringing all that together. But now more so, it's really refined into, like, not exclusively, but I write programs and things like that for a lot of different endurance type athletes. But almost exclusively, the guys I coach really closely are long course triathlon. Mm-hmm. Like, that's 70.3 Ironman. That's where I want to spend the bulk of my time. That's where I like doing the research in and really going in depth with. The other stuff's enjoyable, but like really niche now. It's like long course triathlon's what I want to work in for a long time.
Yep. What's of the niche aspect interest you about that?
Everything changes after 3 hours.
Yep.
And this is probably where we can maybe lead into like the nutrition side, but it's like that's
kind of where I was going.
A lot like triathlon is a progression in terms of pathway. Like, most people will go and do like a sprint distance or a short distance try. They build up to an Olympic distance. They build up to a 70.3, and then they might go and do like an Ironman.
Yep. What's the difference between those just before you go into that?
So a sprint distance, sprint distance can change a bit, but commonly a sprint distance is something like a 500 metre swim, a 20k bike, and then a 5k run.
Yep.
Olympic distance, as it says, is what they do at the Olympics.
Yep.
Usually a 1500 swim, most of the time 1500, 40k bike, and then a 10k run.
Yep.
A 70.3 is now considered long course. Mm-hmm. So short course is Olympic and less. Long course is 70.3. So that's a half Ironman. So a 1.8 or 1.9k swim, 90k's on the bike, and a half marathon.
Yep.
And then an Ironman, a full distance, is a 3.8k swim, 180k's on the bike, and then a marathon.
Yep.
So yeah, it's a pretty ridiculous. Like, the average age grouper in the full distance is somewhere between usually 10 to 13 hours.
Yep.
The pro guys are eight and less.
Yep.
Which is absurd because you think about what that actually outputs to be. One of my guys, end of last year, came fourth in the professional field, ran a 2:48 marathon.
Gross.
after doing 180 on the bike, and he came fourth.
Knowing what the feeling is like coming off a bike on a run too, like that just freaks me out.
Well, I mean, the benchmark from an amateur runner's perspective, most amateurs, it's like if you're a pretty decent runner, want to try and run a sub 3 hour marathon.
Yeah.
Like these guys are doing that after doing 180 on the bike and after doing 3.8k
6
swim.
hours of work,
Like it's a ridiculous type of event, but that's what makes it so interesting for me.
Yeah.
The other part of it is like we just don't know enough. Like the research is nowhere near advanced as it is in, say, football or strength science or like look at the explosion, like velocity-based training over the last while. Like lots of research coming out.
Yeah.
How do you research anything unless I force someone to be in my lab for 6 hours on a bike and then I start testing them?
Yeah.
Like it's hard to recruit, but then also like I can't test them mid-race.
Yeah, your pool is tiny and your availability for someone to do that just because they want to.
But like even if you go, all right, I'm going to test some things from a race perspective, like the rules of the race state, there's no outside assistance. Like you get the aid stations on course, but like I can't go just take a lactate sample 100k into the bike while they're racing. Because apart from anything, they're going like 44k an hour. Yeah. But then like I can't go in because it's outside assistance, so they're DQ'd. So from a research perspective, there's not a lot there. And that's the part that I go, there's a lot of opportunity in the space, but also the exciting part is like, you kind of got to figure stuff out.
You got to work your own shit out and create your own research.
Yeah. It's like you find a few people who are finding ways to make it work, and you sort of test those out and you go, well, it didn't actually really work. So like, why didn't it work or why does it work? So that's the kind of cool part. Whereas like there's a lot of marathon running research. Yeah. Much easier. Like the elite level, they're running 2 hours, 2 hours 10. So that's probably where I've really sort of niched down. Like that's the part that I guess excites me about it is like there's so much unknown, but there'll be so much I'll work out as I keep working in it. Yeah. And then as the sport evolves, like the last 12 to 18 months, it's just gone bananas. Yeah. Like there's people doing some pretty ridiculous things now.
What are your metrics you use, apart from obviously just global time or absolute time? What are your metrics? What are you working with?
So, like, really simply, break it down sport by sport. I mean, ultimately, it's a start line's here, finish line's there. Yep. We got to try and get there as quick as we can. But within that, we got to break it down sport by sport and go, where are the opportunities? So a lot of the triathletes who come in from a running background typically are a bit weaker on the bike. Yep. What are the fixes there? So bike-wise, we're looking at things like normalised power. So normalised power is a better version of average power. Mm-hmm. So if we take a 90k segment and a half Ironman and I look at their normalised power, it gives me what their actual physiological effort is.
What's the difference between the two?
So average power would be, like if you're riding along, it'll just purely calculate the average. So take like your power is going to be volatile. Yep. So there'll be certain sections you might go up a little hill, descend, surge, whatever it might be, go around someone. Your power profile is going up and down, up and down, up and down. It'll calculate the average of that. So you have a look. Typically, the normalised power will be slightly higher than that. And that represents what the actual physiological effort is. If you stayed at a perfect steady state the entire way, what would that actually have been? Yep. So like your average power might be 250, but your normalised might be 270. Yep. So, all right, if we set you on an ergometer and rode at 270, that's the exertion you would have had. Yep. So something like that's really interesting. Over time, it's like, are we seeing an improvement in that? We look at things like decoupling as well, which is just a fancy way of saying how volatile is your heart rate for your power output. We basically want that to be as lower variation as we can, so you have a really consistent effort. That's good from like a pacing perspective too. And then again, like we're looking at individually from a sport perspective, like we know towards the back end, second half of the run, you're going to be starting to fatigue. You're half Ironman wise, like you're 3.5, 4 hours in. Ironman wise, you're 7, 8, 9 hours in. What did that look like? Where did that occur? We're then balancing things like, what's your perception of that too? Like, did you experience any gastrointestinal upset? Was it like, did you just start to feel flat? So is it something we could resolve with caffeine? Is it something we can resolve with fueling? Yep. Were we just not conditioned enough? Did you cramp? Was it because of the conditions and hydration, or was it because you just didn't do enough work? Like, all of that starts to become apparent based on what we're then seeing are those general trends of the data. So there's a couple of key things we look at, but you then just got to start breaking down bit by bit. Yep.
Where do you start?
I generally will start with, like I said, you commonly know where their weaknesses are already. Yep. Like if someone's come from a running background, okay, I'm going to start with the bike and go, how can we get this up? Because if we're looking at diminishing returns, they're going to have more to gain on the bike if they haven't done as much, they don't have as much experience. From that perspective, particularly in the age group guys, like the pros as well, but pros, it's more so like 1% or optimization type things. But the age group guys, I'm looking at the actual exertion part, and then I'm looking at what was your aerodynamics like?
Yeah.
What skin suit did you buy? What helmet did you buy? Are you actually fit correctly on your bike?
It's one of those sports that tech plays a really, really big role.
You might be producing more than enough power, but you're slow because you've got a horrible position and you're not slippery enough through the air.
Yeah.
That's a really easy way to gain 1-2k an hour on average. So it's just, and that's where it's so individualized in terms of, like, you might have two athletes with very similar profile before they start, but they race completely differently. In which case, you then got to start to look at, all right, just what are the opportunities for that individual? Like, was it something back into the run? Was it partway through the bike? Was it something to do with equipment, or was it actually a physiological thing? It's you really just got to sort of just go through a process, just ticking every box. All right, what happened in the swim? All right, did we go out too hard? What did we have in the half an hour before the swim? How did we fuel up the days before? What's the wetsuit like? Was it too tight so you couldn't get a full extension? Did you have your tri-suit up under your wetsuit or down? Did that help? Did you get kicked in the face when you jumped in the water? Yeah. I mean, it's not like swimming in a pool. Like they don't do the mass starts anymore, which is a little less chaotic. But like old
catch people though.
Old Ironman, they used to set 1,500 age groupers off at the same time.
Yeah. Chaos.
And they'd call it the washing machine. Like you just have feet,
chaos,
arms going everywhere, and no one cares.
No.
They'll grab your foot and they'll pull you down. Like it's free for all. There's kind of no
no
rules.
way to like not mandate.
Which is
adjudicate.
I was going to say, which is hilarious, because then you get to the bike and you don't want to sit within 12 metres, but for the person in front. How dare you draft?
How dare you?
But you could drown someone.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it's a bit silly like that. So yeah, it's just a process of ticking the box and just going, all right, what have we already ticked off, and what do we still need to work on? Once we tick all those boxes, like we're probably at a point where we need to completely reassess, because majority of these guys aren't just satisfied with getting a PB. Really good example of that, like guy I worked with over the last couple of years, and I'll shamelessly plug our Mets podcast.
It's no shame.
We sat down and had a chat about the last 3 years, and he started out like not even in triathlon. Like he was clearly endurance inclined, but he hadn't done anything. Went and raced, then came and saw me and was like, I like this triathlon thing, but I have no idea what I'm doing. The following year, he dropped 50 minutes off his time, which is like in a 70.3 is a lot.
Yeah.
He went from like just over 5 hours to like 4:17. The following year after that, he only dropped a couple of minutes. And so then the challenge there was he'd seen such big improvement, and he's getting to this point where it's like we're now looking at incremental gains. But those incremental gains had to come by completely changing everything we were doing.
Yeah.
Because the simple basic stuff just wasn't working anymore, because he's just not at that point.
Yep.
Our next like 6 or 12 months was all just nutritional.
Yep.
Like we changed a few things from a physiology perspective, but he was going into those races like not really worrying too much about what he was eating in the days leading in. What he was taking during the race was kind of all over the place. We optimized that, and he brought the time down a little bit more. Went and did his best time ever, and he finished the race, and he just was like, nah, it wasn't like not good enough. He was proud of the effort.
Yeah.
But I remember him, I got it clear as my mind. He ran through the finish chute of Melbourne 70.3 last year, and he went, like, he's running through, and I was like, he's not enjoying this.
Yeah.
Like, he knows he could have given more. He was 3 minutes off his target time. That's probably why.
Yeah.
But ultimately, like, for these guys, it's like, well, how do we just find that extra little bit? Like, not to say that it's ever good enough. For some guys, it is age group wise, but when you're at that top end where you're sort of starting to push, could we go professionally here? Like, it's how can we just keep getting better, because someone else will keep going and getting better and better and better.
Yeah, and I think even with nutrition, like in that, and obviously I'm not in that space, but I think it's one of those things that people don't realize how beneficial or positive it can be towards your outcome until you realize that it is, if that makes sense. Like it's one of those things that provides such a huge benefit, but you only realize that until someone gives you a kick in the ass and goes, hey, what are you doing here? Like, and even finding that from just people doing long distance running, because again, that's more my aspect of my area. It's just like getting someone to take a gel like an hour and a half in, like makes a world of a difference. But you don't realize that until someone tells you to do it.
Yeah.
And nutrition is one of those things. And as we know, like we all eat food.
Yeah.
We eat 3-4 times a day. Like it's one of those things that's just, it's obviously essential for us, and it's just part of our makeup. But when we're talking about sports performance, like that's a whole different ball game that can lead to such a positive outcome that I think a lot of people miss.
100%. And that's where it's like, again, just by duration, something like a half marathon or a marathon, or probably more so half marathon for the typical person who might run 90 minutes to 2 hours. We know we've got a reasonably finite carbohydrate store. Yep. You can get through an event less than 2 hours with not much fuel intake. Like, it's probably not great, but you could get through 2 hours worth of continuous running with not taking anything in. Your intensity is going to start to dip, but you'll get through okay. Same with game of footy. Like, you might top up here and there, but you don't have to take excessive amounts.
Yep.
Past that point, though, we know it's just like, if you're not taking anything for 90 to 2 hours and you keep going, which you think about these races, like they're going 50 odd hour and 10 in the swim alone in a full distance Ironman.
Yeah.
And they're not taking anything because they're in the middle of the ocean. So unless you're going to stop,
pull it out. Water.
Yeah. So you're going through that first bit where you're not fueling it all. So a lot of depletion going on in terms of fuel. And you're trying to minimize that, but like the intensity that they're going at, like you're going to be burning through fuel. You get on the bike and it's like, we have to start topping up now, otherwise you're going to hit a flat spot real early and you've still got 7 hours to go.
Yep.
So a lot of that is, part of it's just educating people to eat. Like the number of guys I have come in, like age group wise, and they're like, I had a guy end of last year doing 70.3 racing. Like when I say bigger frame compared to like the real like light guys who are like 60
you versus
kilo.
me.
Yeah, like pretty much.
You could say it.
Yeah, he was going on like 50, not even 50 grams of carbs an hour, which is really quite low. And like the old school recommendation, like 60 to 90 grams an hour for endurance type stuff.
Is that per kilo body weight, or is there some relative measure of
no,
that?
So
or is it
the really
blanket?
old school way was just like, well, we know we can uptake 60 grams of glucose an hour.
Yeah.
The extra 30 comes from another transporter, so fructose, another sucrose, another carbohydrate source. So, and this is where the long course, I guess, research isn't quite there, because guys are doing 120, and I'll get to that in a sec, but we don't really know how they're actually able to do it.
Of course.
Scientifically, we only really know up to about 90. So, like, just educating, it's like, well, if we take an extra 10 grams of carb, like, that's still on the very low end of what we can actually do. Yeah. He went and he's just like, I've just felt amazing. Like, I just I was writing. This is great. Because he was just taking such low intake. But like big guy, he's going to burn through a lot of fuel really, really quickly.
Yeah.
So a small little adjustment like that was just getting him into the general recommendation zone, not even further optimizing. Like, I want to keep lifting him up, but it's a process of like, I can't just get him to go into that race after racing on less than 50 grams an hour. Which if you want a sort of practical insight on that, that's kind of taking like 2 gels an hour. Ish, depending on what your gels are. Which is 1 every half hour. That's not too bad, but that's just not enough. Trying to get him up to say 90, which is kind of like taking 3.5 gels, depending on what your gels are. It's just not going to happen overnight.
Yeah.
It's a long process of getting him to be able to first tolerate it so he doesn't get gastrointestinal upset. What gels are we using? At 50 grams an hour, the gel he's currently using, the brand he's using, might be okay.
Yeah.
Once we start putting it in more frequently and quicker, that might not be okay anymore. So do we now start putting carbs in our bottles instead? Because we're now taking more gels, is it practical to carry them all? Or do we pick the ones up on course? Like, you now start going through this decision-making process of how do we actually get it in practically. But then you also got to train yourself to be actually able to absorb it. Like, you can start pumping gels. You start pumping gels and you're not used to it, you're going to get sick real quick.
Some trouble.
Yeah, you're going to get sick real quick.
Yeah.
But then even outside of that, like, you might then have a really good tolerance of it and be able to absorb it, and that's all fine. We've got a high intake strategy. You get to 3 hours, gastrointestinal upset sets in, and you're like, I can take gels like no tomorrow in training. Like, this is weird. Like, I still can get the gels down, but I'm still getting these problems.
Yeah.
Well, it probably came back to what did you eat in the couple of days before?
Yeah.
In terms of the type of carbohydrate that you're taking in. Was there already some damage through the intestine from the types and sources of food you're getting in? Not bad damage. But just enough. Like, how much
anything that leads to a negative outcome, I guess.
Yeah, how much fibre are you taking in those couple of days? Like, that might be normal for you week to week, but in a race circumstance where you elevate the intensity just that tiny bit more and do it for a bit longer, it's like, now we're in all sorts of trouble. And it had nothing to do with your, like, during race strategy. It was everything in the few days prior. So that's a huge area from a optimization perspective in endurance now. And long course endurance is like, you get your like, most guys are fit enough to do what they want to do. They just don't have enough fuel to be able to power the work.
No, and I think people get stuck in I need to increase my capacity, not my ability to use my capacity.
Yep.
And I think that's when we talk about, people struggling with nutrition or not having an understanding of how beneficial it is. I think
it's easier for us as humans to think, train more, get better, get fitter, can do more.
Yep.
We forget that there's things that actually make us a little bit better at doing that, whether that from a movement perspective is clearing up an ankle or a hip or a shoulder or something that makes our movement more efficient, or from a nutritional point of view of better utilizing or increasing our fuel storages so that we can actually utilize it.
Yeah.
With nutritional strategies, if we're talking about, like, let's say someone wants to prepare for a marathon, or doesn't matter what it is, anything, whether that is weekend warrior or that is from a professional point of view, what are your kind of blanket starting points or rules for engagement, I guess you could say? 3 or 5 like non-negotiable things in your eyes that you need to be doing.
Purely just nutritional?
Yeah, purely just nutritional.
Number 1, what's your day-to-day hydration like?
Yep.
So getting into we know roughly, like, if you're dehydrated by about 2%, so you could look at that as like jump on the scales if you're down by about 2% body weight. You're going to lose about 8 to 9% of your performance at threshold. Yep. So threshold's a theoretical 45 to an hour. So when we're talking marathon running, we're running sub-threshold. So that percentage decline will actually be a little bit smaller at marathon pace.
Sure. Yep.
But if you're going into a race already dehydrated, we're in a bit of trouble because it's only going to get worse. You're not going to get to a point, like, you can dehydrate yourself pretty well and still be running at the end of an event. But if you're going in a bit dehydrated, that's a problem. Yep. Biggest thing is like, what was your hydration like the 5 or 6 weeks before the marathon, not just the few days leading in where you're like, oh, it's going to be hot in the weekend, I better drink a bit more.
What's your minimum standard for hydration?
Very blanket rule. I typically go, if you're at least getting in 2 to 2.5 liters a day for most people, prior to what you're then losing from a training sense, you're probably okay. Yep. You don't need to be going crazy with it, but that's a very rough rule that fits most runners. Yep. Some guys are going to be higher and lower based on what you sweat, but that's where it sort of factors in. Like today or tomorrow, for example, like, I'll go out and do a run. Like, all right, I'll try and get throughout the day my standard 2.5. But then if I've got like an hour run, if I were to weigh myself before and afterwards, see what I've lost. If I need to put back another 1.5 liters or 2 liters on top of that, well, that's appropriate for that day. But today I don't have to run. Didn't really sweat a lot at the gym this morning, so I might just go a little bit higher than my standard 2 to 2.5.
Is it still like blanket? Excuse me, like 1.5 times what you lose?
Typically, 1.2 to 1.5. Again, depending on what that sweat rate was like. I always then go, like, in key sessions in the week, a little bit of sodium within that, particularly the recovery side of things. Yep. Just helps you want to drink a bit more. Yep. If anything, it's like, yes, the sodium.
Bag of pretzels. Yeah, that's my go-to.
The sodium replenishment's great. I mean, the one that I just use a hydrolyte tablet. Yeah. Like one hydrolyte tablet. Like, you don't need to go overboard, but if anything, something like pretzels, the salt in it's great because you want to drink more. Even just the taste, like hydrolyte wise, like, it's got a little bit of flavouring in it. So that naturally promotes a little bit of extra hydration. Yep. Great. You're going to uptake that fluid a little bit better because you're going to want to drink it. We don't want to get to the end of a run. You've been drinking water during the run or whatever it might be. And now we get to the end and you go, the last thing I want to do today, because it's been hot and I've been drinking water all day, all through my run, is now drink more water. Sometimes that can just be a good little change up, and then we get back on water later on. Hydration is really, really key.
Yep.
Number two, I'd be going, really looking at, it comes down to how long you're out there. And this is the thing I think a lot of amateurs miss, is that if you're Eliud Kipchoge, so if you're running 2 hours for a marathon, that is a very different marathon or very different event to someone who runs 4 hours and someone who runs 6 hours.
Yeah.
If you're running 4 or 6, you've got to be more conscious of what you're putting back in than Kipchoge is running 2 hours. He doesn't have to put a lot because the event's over short duration. He's just covering ground quicker. He's actually depleting probably less.
Yeah.
That's where the longer it goes, the more conscious you have to be. Something small and reasonably regular is not a bad way to go about it if you're completely new to it. Whether that be gels, and then within that, find what works.
Yeah.
So if you like gels, great. If you don't like gels, find another gel. If you don't like gels at all, eat something.
Yeah.
I generally, personally, don't really handle gels too great.
Yeah.
So, like, from a football perspective, like, half time I'm just on the lollies.
Yeah.
But even like when I go and race like a 70.3, I get to the aid station, I'll pick up a couple of lollies.
Yeah.
Or a cup of Coke at an aid station because it gives me a bit of caffeine as well.
Yeah.
Some people handle the caffeine great. Some people don't like the caffeine.
Yeah.
Different doses of caffeine do different things. So you got to practice it.
Yeah.
And then, like, find what you like, but then go and practice what you are attempting to do well in advance of the marathon. Yeah. Like, you want to be practicing that schedule pretty well. And I guess probably the last thing to follow on from that is practice above what you're trying to take during the race. Yeah. So that might be, if you're like in a marathon, if you're someone like my size, you can probably get away with sort of 60 grams an hour, 70 grams an hour if you're running like a 3-ish hour. Yeah. So it's not a lot. It's only like a couple of gels here and there, maybe some cups of stuff at aid stations. If you're only trying to take in 60, like in your training runs, try and get 80 back in.
For general, how much is generally in a gel? Just the
20 to 25 is typical. Sure. Some will be higher, some will be lower, some will be more watery.
Of course, yeah.
Like you got to factor in what's exactly in them. But practice higher than what you're expecting to take during the race. Yeah. Because then when you get to, and in more difficult sources. So if you're expecting to, in the race, just be on fluids, we'll take gels in your training because that's a harder source for you to get down, but then take more of it.
Yep.
You get into the race day, you're at 60, easier source, body just takes it up super quick. From a running perspective, most people probably aren't going to be on solids. Mm-hmm. But from a like Ironman perspective, like that's where we're looking at. For some guys, it's like doing gels all day isn't great.
Exhausting.
Like we're now taking 15, 20 gels potentially. Yeah. We got to find bars or bananas or something different. So that's probably the biggest thing. It's like the actual input strategy you have. Like, yeah, it's important, but you got to practice that strategy and practice above what you're aiming to take. So you're going to get into that race, and like we're just eliminating that aspect of guts are just struggling because you're putting so much back in.
Yeah. Let's say someone does I'm just trying to think of some reasonable times, like a 4-hour marathon. Mm-hmm. At what stages would you recommend they take an intake?
You want to be having something just before.
So probably going around in like 150, 145 through a half, maybe?
Yeah. So I'd be saying if we go right through the day, or like right through to until you get to the end of the race, I'd be going, you want to be getting a pretty solid amount of fuel back in about 2 hours before. Mm-hmm. So, okay, got to wake up a little bit earlier if your race starts at 7 o'clock.
Everyone's favourite.
But it doesn't have to be huge, but like get a breakfast in. The number of guys I chat to who just don't eat. I'm like, come on, like eat something.
How do you get over that barrier before you go into like some strategies in that 4-hour marathon? How do you get over that barrier with people that go, I don't like to eat before I perform?
A lot of it really is just setting a good routine.
Slap them in the head.
Yeah, like if you want to have a good day, like get up that little bit earlier. Like some of the guys I've said, get up early, have something to eat, and go back and have another 45-minute nap. If that makes you feel better. Alternatively, it's just small little increments as we lead in. So you want to, like half an hour before, you want to be having something small. So some might do a gel, some might do half a banana, muesli bar type of thing like that. Just small, quick little top up. Obviously, you want to eat well day or two before as well. But then in a marathon, typically I say try to get to the 45-minute mark as best you can without really taking too much. Yep. A lot of people who are used to gels and know taking gels, once you take them, you feel like you can't stop. Yeah. Because your body will be like, oh, this is nice. Start up taking it. The further you get, more depletion will want to take it up quick. If we're just taking gel from early, like, again, it's just hard to keep that rate up and you'll start to pay for it a bit later. Yeah. But that's why I say if you can try to get to the 45 to an hour mark first before you start really having to dip in, apart from anything, like just settle into the race and get comfortable in the race first. But then at
especially
that point,
in like an event like that, you spend half an hour getting out of traffic anyway.
Yeah, 100%. And so that's where it's like you just want to get settled before you start taking on nutrition and worrying about that. At that point then, it's going to be different in terms of schedule. I don't necessarily recommend specifically, you have to take something every half hour. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not, part of it is as need. Like, if you're feeling like you need something, take it. Yeah. If you don't feel like you need it, how long's it been since the last one? If it's been 45 minutes, okay, it's probably a good idea. Yep. Just make logical decisions through a marathon. Like something like, again, 4 hours, like, and
it's probably a weekend
at the intensity
warrior pace, I would say.
Yeah. Like 3.5 to 4 hours is very, very common. Yep. That's it in that sort of 5-minute K pace sort of category around either side of that.
I can do my math. Good.
But that's where I go, like, just something semi-regular is going to be fine. Like, you're not getting to the end of that. The intensities you're running at, you as long as you are taking something, which could be just a gel. You might take a gel every 45 minutes. Like, that's going to be probably enough for those paces. Marathon running an event like that, you can generally get away with it. It's as we start getting longer than that, that's where it's like. But then also from a running perspective, like how many gels can you actually carry? If you want to take your own nutrition, how many gels can you carry when you run? Yeah. Like, are you going to try and carry 10. Like, good luck to you, because
Yeah.
how many pockets you got? Most people don't have any pockets running at once.
Pockets.
Yeah, so then you go, oh, am I relying on what's on course? Does that give me enough?
Yeah.
Like, okay, I'm not taking as many gels, so I'm going to save them for every 45 minutes.
Yeah.
But then every aid station in those 20-minute increments in between, I might just have a sip and do like a little mouth rinse of carbohydrate. So like just pick up a Gatorade cup, mouth rinse it. You can swallow it if you want, or you can spit it back out. Like, that's going to give you a bit of an effect. We know that mouth rinsing works. And it's just a small little dosage to get you through to the next gel. I mean, all of these things are going to be highly, highly individual.
Of course, yeah.
Like how frequently and stuff. And like what that source is. Like, I have guys who just like get the Ziploc bags and just pour a bunch of honey in it.
Interesting.
Those like
I've had people freeze honey.
The fuel belt little bottles. So when I say a fuel belt, for those who aren't familiar, it's a very triathlon thing. It's literally a clip-on belt that has little pouches that you have little bottles in. Those little bottles, though, you take.
It's a triathlon bum bag.
It's a triathlon bum bag. Those little bottles. So Lionel Sanders is one of the best like leading triathletes, long course triathletes in the world. He does maple syrup and salt.
Interesting. Yeah.
He's Canadian.
Yeah, Mac checks out.
But like something like that, like if you like maple syrup and you don't like gels, like maple syrup's a really easy source to get carbohydrate.
Yeah, I've had people like freeze like honey and water to like make it brittle kind of thing.
It tastes good.
Yeah.
Like if it tastes good and you like getting it, like all these variations, but like having a thing like that, you might be able to load it up a bit thicker and just sip on it.
Yeah.
So you're not taking the whole lot down, but then in between you're taking some other stuff. So I generally say as long as you're getting something in semi-regularly throughout and just gradual little top-ups here and there, you're going to be fine at those paces.
Yep.
It's once we go and start going significantly faster, you get yourself into trouble because you burn through the fuel a hell of a lot quicker.
Yeah. So we've got hydration number 1, gradual intake number 2. What's maybe number 3?
I reckon number 3 is back on what I was saying with like practice your fueling prior and practice above and practice more difficult than what you're actually going to do.
Like most things, it's very personal.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. It's like, and like you look at that from a training sense and go, well, for like something like half marathon, I go, typically you want a few more Ks in the legs than what you're actually going to be running on the day, or at least more time in the legs.
Yeah.
So we condition a bit over so that the under on race day is much easier. Same with nutrition and same with hydration. Yeah.
Is my last question is for someone who's looking to get into medium to long form endurance, what is your recommendation?
Come and see me.
We'll
take that one.
Oh, shameless. So the reasoning where that comes from, we had a board, on our whiteboard, we have a question every week. What was the question last week was, what do you want to achieve in 2023? And I've had a lot of people, 5K run, 10K run, half marathon, Ironman, etc. That was a lot of the common themes last year. And as we know, the 2023, new year, new me kind of thing.
100%.
A lot of people start like that.
This time of year is a killer.
Yeah, a lot of people start like that, which is great. But what is for someone who maybe has already started doing a little bit or hasn't but wants to, what is your recommendation in that space?
It largely depends on what that goal is. Ironman's very different to a 10K.
Correct.
My first thing is go and speak to someone who knows what they're talking about, whether it's a coach, an S&C coach, like someone who has or has gone and done one of those events. Like someone who has just that extra little bit of expertise than what you already have, mainly just to see if it's realistic or not.
Yeah.
The number of athletes who come to see me and go, new year, new me, I'm going to go and do an Ironman. First question I ask, have you ever done a triathlon before?
Yeah.
If the answer is no, I say go and do a sprint.
Yeah.
Because even if they want me to coach them from the outset and they go, you're going to be the best person, like I know I can get them to there. They might hate triathlon. Like if they haven't done one before, they might hate it.
Yep.
Have you swum in open water? No. Probably go do that first. Because if you get out there and you get like Geelong 70.3 is coming up in a couple of months. Like that course out at Geelong in the bay is basically a triangle. You go out good 500, 600, 700 meters just into the middle of the bay swimming. If you're not comfortable there and you have to get rescued, so to speak, because you're uncomfortable, you panic, whatever, or you can't make the cutoff time, race is done. Yeah. So why are we doing 9 months of prep if you're not going to be able to actually handle the demand? So a lot of that sounds harsh, but it's we just got to be realistic about the timeline. Like maybe this year is not the year to do the Ironman. This year might be the year to do a half Ironman, or let's go and do an Olympic distance. That progression might happen really quickly. Cool, we tick that off really fast. Now we can build. Great, like that'll work for some people.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest part of it is like set your goal and get really excited about it, and then be willing to have a really realistic conversation if it's achievable.
Yeah.
it definitely can be. Particularly if you put down the goal is Ironman, the cutoff 16 hours.
Yeah.
And there's cutoffs throughout the event. Personally, for me, I would rather you get into that race, and you might be a 12 or a 13 or a 14 hour. That's fine. You're well under the cutoff. But like, if you're going to deliberately have a 14 or 15 hour day because you just want to make yourself hurt, you're a crazy person.
Yeah. Gross.
But I want you to be able to get through that race and feel like, yes, I've achieved it, but I achieved it really, like I did really well. Like I did, like maybe in my mind I thought I could just complete it, but I did 11 hours. Like that, well above my expectation. Like I would rather we do that because we've built a really good foundation of gradually moving through the distances. Then we did it when you're ready for it, rather than jump in and you just have the worst experience.
Yeah.
Because again, from my side, it's like I want people to come and race triathlon. Like,
yeah,
it's a great sport.
Like
it's a really great community. But it's the type of thing that like you just got to be realistic about what's the timeline, the expectations of where you're at now, and where you can go. Outside of that, largely then it's just set as much of a foundation as you can. You want Ks in the legs. Don't have to go overboard with it, but just gradually just build just general volume. If you're looking at a 9-month timeline, like as we sit here, a lot of people who look at Ironman might be doing Bustleton. So that's first weekend of December every year. We've got 11 months to prep.
Yeah.
These few couple of months, even the guys that like I coach and things like that, I'm just like, we just got to accumulate.
Yeah.
Like I'm not really fussed. Like we'll have some high intensity in there to mix it up, some variety. Volume's not massive just yet, but it's just, we just have to get 2, 3, 4 months of just really consistent. You get out there, you get it done, we nail it, we go again. You just want to be bulletproof to be able to go, I can handle bigger training volumes, not a problem.
Yeah.
They're the two things.
Yeah, time is crucial.
Yeah, 100%.
And prep. Cool. Any more for any more? Appreciate you coming down again.
All good.
You've been down here a few times for a little lift here and there, but
yeah, it only took me 4 seasons to get on the podcast.
Nice.
All right.
Hey, don't blame me. Blame the other two. I'm the new guy now.
You're the host, aren't you?
I'm now.
Oh.
I'm taking over.
Okay.
Taking over this place. No, I got too much spare time on my hands. You know, just like to talk to people.
Far too much.
No, I appreciate you coming down. I'll put the Mets podcast and things and your Instagram in the description. Well, Georgia will, because you know she's a star and that's what we pay her for.
Absolutely.
So, no, I appreciate you coming down. I'm sure it was highly valuable to a lot of people. One, just learning about you and what the umpiring side of life is. You know, lots of people are football fans, but also from, as we said, this year, it's January, everyone wants to do something endurance-based. New year, new me. So some very important tools and strategies for people that they can utilise, which is fantastic, especially for our members, clients, but also people in the wider Virtus community. So I appreciate you coming down.
No worries. Thanks
my
for having
man.
me.
You too.
Have a good day.